right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. So unlike most of you, certainly most of the speakers, I'm not expert in Indian philosophical traditions. I have some acquaintance with certain strands of Indian philosophical thought. So what I'm doing is a bit different from what other people will be doing. I'm going to focus on one generic way of thinking that we find in certain strands of those traditions. A certain way of thinking about God in relation to the cosmos and to conscious finite subjects such as ourselves. My gangly term for this broad view is non-illusory theistic monism. I will explain that in just a moment. So for clarity of presentation and to remain within the bounds of my own scholarly competence, I will identify my target in abstract analytic terms. I will then note some issues and options about the nature of consciousness and of the cosmos that are found in recent scientific and/or Western philosophical theorizing. So, and from this discussion will emerge a specific set of recommendations as to how to harmonize the broad philosophical stance that I call non-illusory theistic monism with that sort of theorizing about consciousness and the cosmos. All right, so we can move on. There are three constituent ideas in my target notion, and I will take them in turn. So first, non-illusory. So the kind of view that I want to explore, unlike, say, Samkaras, allows that there really are the plurality of entities and conscious subjects that our ordinary experience seems to indicate, and that our best scientific theories affirm. Monism, at a minimum, is the idea that the plurality of finite objects and subjects notwithstanding, reality as a whole has a deep unity. Furthermore, that unified whole is prior, ontologically, prior to its parts, putting quotation, because not everyone's going to want to have that notion of part, but it's prior to its parts in an important ontological sense. The existence of the parts or modes or aspects derives from and depends upon the existence of the whole, which is a kind of inversion of the usual atomistic thinking that we often have, that everything's built up from the bottom. Here you have a top-down. The whole is in some sense prior to, and parts or aspects are just in some sense derived, limited ways of thinking about some aspect of the whole. So it's not enough for this view, for this monistic view, that God is in all things or pervades all things. Because that is also true on classical monotheism, which is a different sort of metaphysical view. Classical monotheism holds that God freely gives being to finite things in a radical act of creation ex nihilo, sustains them moment to moment, empowers them. But that kind of monotheism nonetheless insists that God transcends all created things and is an ontologically wholly distinct being, right? Whereas monism denies that ontological distinctness of God and the constituent entities. So theistic monism then must deny that finite things are ontologically distinct entities or substances. And it's natural to explicate such priority monism as the one independent substance, often referred to as God, and its many finite dependent modes or aspects. All right, now theistic, down at the bottom there. This, of course, is the most controversial element of my target. People fight about, right? When is it appropriate to apply the term God to certain kinds of metaphysical views? What does it take? So what does it take? I'm going to assume that the term God requires that two things are true of what is called God. One, that the being be supremely valuable and worthy of worship. And two, that it be a conscious mind, minimally a conscious intellect, that in some manner processes or at least grasps information in some sense. There's some kind of cognitive aspect to it. Even that minimal characterization is controversial, but that's what I'm going to assume. All right, consciousness. So now now we're going to think a little bit about consciousness, just very quickly, mindful of the time. In thinking about consciousness, we of course start by reflecting on the range of states that we ourselves experience. Theory, whether purely philosophical theory or also scientific theory, then enters in two ways: to discern the essential general characteristics of any possible consciousness, not only human, and two, to decide whether there might be a gap between how consciousness seems to be and how it is fundamentally, what its true nature is. That's the role of theory, to address those kind of questions. All right, so some aspects of consciousness. Now, the first one is often called qualitative character, which comes in distinct modes. So every waking and some of our sleeping moments, right, we undergo a steady stream of conscious experiences in many modes. Modes meaning like visual experiences, auditory, tactile. That's what I mean by different modes. So we have perceptual experiences of the world around us. We have bodily sensations. We have feelings and moods, thoughts, conscious thoughts, desires, hopes, fears, and a host of other psychological attitudes. All such conscious states have felt qualities. There is something they are like for us. They're subjects, right? There's something it's like to look at an object, right? The object is a certain way objectively, but there's something that's like to have a conscious experience of that object. It has a kind of qualitative character. The redness of a rose, considered physically, is just a surface that reflects light in certain wavelengths, right? But subjectively, the experience of a red rose is, well, it's just the way it looks. It's the kind of thing that you could not convey adequately to a person blind from birth, right? Who just lacks that sensory mode altogether. Such felt or subjective qualities appear to be distinct in kind from ordinary physical qualities of middle-sized objects, like roses or chairs. For example, yes, I already talked about redness. All right, so that's qualitative character. Then two, intentional character. Consciousness is one of two marks of the mental that philosophers have proposed. The second is often called intentionality, or it's sometimes called representation or mental content or aboutness. Intentionality is the directedness of mental states. They're being about something or other to the subject. So if I have a perceptual experience of the chair, the content of my experience is there is a chair in front of me. It's directed at the chair. I can think about objects that I don't perceive, like the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, right? My thought is directed at that object, right? It's about that. It has content about that object. That's what the term intentionality is trying to capture. So being intentional in this sense is not to be confused with acting intentionally or on purpose. That's just an English, same word, two different senses. How consciousness, the qualitative felt character, and the intentionality, the directedness or aboutness, how these two aspects of conscious experience are related in general is a large and much debated question in philosophy, but it is commonly held that conscious experience always involves some kind of intentional content. That is, you might put it this way, awareness is always awareness of something or other. I'll return to that claim in a moment. Third characteristic of consciousness, what I call state unity. Conscious states exhibit interesting kinds of unity. For example, perceptual experiences famously exhibit Gestalt unity. There's a whole bunch of elements right now of my visual experience, and they all come together in one unified visual experience. So the features of my environment, immediate environment, are not presented to me in consciousness as a kind of list or a bundle, but rather they come to me as in an organized structure. There are objects of relative sizes and relative relationships to one another, and it all comes together in one holistic visual experience. Perceptual experiences also exhibit spatial unity. Apparent entities such as this individual and that chair appear to be located in particular regions of this immediate space, and these include entities that show up in other perceptual modalities. So I can hear an object as being located a certain distance from something I see, right? That's part of the nature of the experience. So, nor is perception the only locus of mental unity. Thoughts and other psychological attitudes exhibit semantic unity or unity of meaning. When I think it's best to have an umbrella handy at all times when in Oxford, this episode of thought is distinct from merely entertaining each constituent of the thought in sequence, Oxford, umbrella, etc. They come together in one unified meaning. All right, subject unity. So I talked about state unity, the experience being unified. The forms of unity exhibited by conscious experiences are distinct from and appear to presuppose a more basic unity of their subject, the experiencer. Our richly varied and intermittent streams of conscious experiences and other mental states are experienced from a single, unified, subjective perspective or point of view. I, you, right? We each occupy, it appears, a subjective point of view. There's a unity to ourselves that's more fundamental than the unity of our experiences. Now, many philosophers, of course, argue that the human subject, or the unity of the human subject, is an illusion. Others have attempted to identify the subject with a complex but functionally integrated system or stream of experiences. Here I'm merely describing how it seems. It seems to us there's a more fundamental unity to ourselves that's kind of basic. All right, now science of human and animal consciousness, some main findings. I'm gonna take all of a minute, or a minute and a half to summarize this. There is a great deal of research on the neural underpinnings of human and animal consciousness. But much more is unknown than is known about this subject. I've asked neuroscientists who work on this to estimate how much do you think you know relative to what is there to be known about the relationship of human consciousness to neural processes in the brain. And he said, and I've heard others agree with this assessment, at best 5%, probably much less than that, right? So they know lots of little details, how neurons interact and so on, but how everything comes together, this is very mysterious. That said, right now there are currently more than 20 proposed frameworks for thinking about the unity of consciousness from a kind of neural perspective, right? And the fact there are that many proposals for frameworks shows you that we don't know. There's just lots and lots of ideas out there. There are 4 or 5 that are really leading frameworks, but really there's even more ideas than that. But perhaps the 3 most important findings that have emerged in the last 30 plus years are these. 1, specific features that are presented in consciousness have local correlates. So when I see the color of a particular object, there's a portion of the brain, the visual cortex, right? And there are dedicated modules dedicated to detecting color, right? So relatively localized entities. So that's and similar for shapes, edges of objects. There are very specific, localized, dedicated modules for that. Second, there is no dedicated consciousness region, right, or circuit in the brain. And this is a difficulty, right? The brain is, of course, a very flexible device, but different parts of the brain sort of are activated at different times when the very same person is having different conscious experiences. It's not like it's all taking place in some specific region. You say, oh, there's the consciousness emanator. There's nothing like that in the brain, okay? That's pretty solidly known at this point. 3, which regions of the brain modulate consciousness at any time is a matter of these regions' network properties, not their intrinsic nature, but just which kind of networks with other kinds of aspects of the brain. In sum, you might say what has emerged from consciousness research in the last 30 years in neuroscience is that human consciousness depends on a shifting coalition of informationally integrated local feature processors in the brain. So you got all these little local, small-scale processors, and it's a shifting coalition somehow is involved when we have conscious experience or conscious states generally. All right. Now, philosophical perspectives on all of this, on consciousness. One perspective is deflationary physicalism. Research has shown that there is, at least often, a causal relationship between neural dynamics and consciousness, since it's now possible to manipulate the brain in order to generate changes in consciousness. Physicalists, reductionists, assert that consciousness is not merely caused by neural dynamics, right, but instead, more strongly, consists in some still to be identified neural states and processes. The fundamental difficulty for this position is that neuroscience, like other physical sciences, describes its target phenomenon in terms of structural configurations, spatial arrangements of neurons connected by wire-like axons, each neuron and axon having a complex molecular structure in turn, and the dynamical patterns of interaction among them. However, the most salient aspects of consciousness are not structural or dynamical, but instead qualitative, like I talked about, the felt qualities of conscious experience. It's about what they are like intrinsically. These qualitative features cannot be captured in by a purely structural, dynamical description of interaction of constituents. You don't capture the qualitative character of what's happening. So the look of cool blue in Ricardo's current visual experience, for example, cannot be captured by any proposed instance of neuronal firing pattern X in network Y when caught up in a wider recurrent signaling process Z, right? You could give a very complex description of that sort, but you won't capture the qualitative aspect of his experience. Again, a blind neuroscientist could fully understand that dynamical structural description just as well as any other neuroscientist, but would lack that understanding of the actual intrinsic qualitative character of the experience. So, in any case, reducing divine consciousness to complex physical consciousness, divine consciousness to complex physical phenomena is not an option for proponents of our target doctrine of non-illusory theistic monism, given its commitment to the priority of God to the everyday world. Right? This physicalism is very much a bottom-up perspective on reality. So any proponent of this kind of monism is going to be committed to rejecting it. So one alternative perspective then on consciousness and the brain is known as emergence. This is a term that's used in many different ways, but in the way that I'm going to talk about it, strong emergence, says that consciousness is causally generated and sustained by neural processes while being ontologically distinct from them and influencing them in turn. So there's both bottom-up and top-down interaction going on between the human brain and conscious states of the subject. This emergentism, however attractive it may be, is sort of from a philosophical, kind of an ordinary philosophical or scientific perspective, is not a good option, again, for the monist, since the emergentist posits an existence priority of physical reality to consciousness. Consciousness only exists because there first are organized structures like brains to causally generate conscious states. So what is the alternative? I've noticed in the titles of some talks for this conference the term cosmopsychism that has suddenly been bandied about. So this is a recently popular alternative for the monist. It's a modification of panpsychism, right, which is of course the thesis very roughly that all the elemental qualities of the world, perhaps charge, mass, spin, magnetic moment in current physical theory, whatever turn out to be the fundamental physical qualities of the world, physical theory only describes them in dispositional terms, right? If you ask a physicist, what is mass, what is negative charge, you'll be given a description of what mass does, how it contributes to the interaction of massive bodies, right? How they move, right? It'll be given a dispositional character. And the panpsychist comes along and says, right, but there's an intrinsic character to those elemental qualities. There has to be something, mass, charge, what they just are intrinsically. Let's suppose those are conscious qualities, felt qualities, that interact in the way scientific theory describes. That is, they're phenomenal or experiential qualities, right down in the elements of the physical world. And then the conscious experiences of humans and animals are somehow composed of such elemental qualities. Well, this kind of view, this panpsychist view, faces well-known challenges, but consider the variation on it in line with priority monism. This will be the next slide, on which the conscious qualities of all finite entities, like you and me, derive ontologically from a single, you might say, phenomenally variegated, but ontologically unitary fabric that is the entire conscious state of the universe. This view has been dubbed priority cosmopsychism. It's a bit of a mouthful. All right, so it's a non-trivial challenge for this view to explain why there are finite subjects, such as us, associated with just some portions of the divine mind. Why are chairs not also conscious subjects? There's a lot of work to be done to make that view plausible. But I want to highlight one other challenge. Cosmopsychism is silent regarding the intentional character of the divine mind. What God is the intentional character, what God is conscious of. Some Indian philosophers asserted that God's consciousness is empty. It is pure awareness. This seems to me to be a hard saying, right? The very idea of an empty consciousness. However, it may be easier to sharply separate consciousness from all cognition, content, at the level of the cosmic consciousness, even though in us they are inextricably linked. I'm never just pure conscious. I never have a pure conscious state that doesn't have some content. I'm always conscious of something, whether it be physical objects or thoughts or what have you. But, so even if at the cosmic level, empty consciousness is a coherent notion, it is not plausibly divine, as it would fail one and plausibly both of the conditions that I proposed as essential for using the term God, right? Conscious intellect, having an intellect and being the most worship-worthy reality possible. All right, I know that's a big statement, but I'm going to move on. You can challenge it in the Q&A. So, final perspective, cosmic hylomorphism. William's going to like this. Yeah, I saw it. All right. So I suggest there's a better way for the monist than cosmopsychism. Okay? One that gives the conscious mind ontological priority over finite minds with respect to both conscious experience, the felt character of consciousness, and cognition, intellect, right, thought. And that is to think of God in terms of what I'm going to call cosmic hylomorphism. Hylomorphism, of course, is a doctrine that we associate with Aristotle in the Western tradition. It posits that certain kinds of middle-sized objects, including especially living things, are natural unities. In these natural unities, the elements that are unified are structured by the form of the whole, where the form is a metaphysical ingredient that you might say confers an organizing set of principles and powers of activity to those elements. Elements are taken up into the whole in such a way that the powers that they have are given and directed by the organizing form. Hence, there's an ontological priority of the whole, the living whole, to its virtual parts. This is the doctrine of hylomorphism in very rough terms. The idea then of cosmic hylomorphism is that even hylomorphic wholes, like you and me, living substances, are taken up into a further, more fundamental substance. Right? We, in some sense, even as as wholes organize the elements of our bodies, we are organized. There's even a prior organizing activity of the whole that takes us up as elements, right, into it. So we are now nature-dependent entities, not primary substances, to use another term of Aristotle's. There's only one primary substance, which is the whole. The cosmic substance could then be taken to be both conscious and cognizing. That's my suggestion. This will go beyond my competence, but reading a bit of Ramanuja, I get this is kind of, I feel like that's where he's going. At least that's my way of appropriating, from my own training. I feel like that's the sort of idea he's after when he talks about the world as God's body. But I'll say no more about that. All right. Where am I at with respect to that? I'm out of time. All right. Let me see if I can just summarize. So what do we need from scientific, when you look at the big picture of contemporary cosmology, physics, what does it say about the universe? Well, it's a unified complexity. Time is bound up with space in an important sense, and there are some options there for how to think about time. One of which is to say time is a fully realized dimension. All elements of time exist, right? Unlike the sense we often have, the future is not yet out there, right? The past is gone. There's just the present moment, right? On the eternalist perspective, no, the past exists, the future exists, the present exists, and then the question is whether there's some further element of being now that moves across this manifold of time, and that's a choice point. Another issue is physics says our universe is immense, but it's finite. It's a bounded universe. Okay, that's potentially in tension with the idea of thinking of the universe as God, as the greatest possible being, right? Being bounded. Having measure, right, rather than being measureless, right? One possibility, a more speculative aspect of physics, is to suggest that our universe is one. It inhabits a multiverse, a vast plurality of universes. I think this is an idea that is potentially friendly for the theistic monist, because now the cosmos is a much more vast, virtually limitless kind of reality, but that's a very speculative aspect of physics. It's motivated by certain theoretical puzzles in contemporary theorizing, but that's potentially helpful. So conclusion, final slide, is simply this. I'm sorry that I took a bit more time. If you're asking how to be a non-illusory theistic monist, in such a way that it's fitted, harmonized with scientific thought concerning consciousness in the cosmos, well, you might embrace priority but not existence monism, right? The stronger kind of monism, that'd be something like Sankara, right? There's just the one, that's it, right? But be a priority monist. Be either a cosmopsychist or better, a cosmic hylomorphist. Be an eternalist about time, and that's easy given contemporary physics, right? I didn't have time to talk about the choice point there. And then, to be cautiously, there are some forms of multiverse theorizing that I think are problematic from a theistic point of view. I can't get into that. But at any rate, there are some possibilities there that might help with the worry that our universe seems just finite. in extent. I'm done.
Thank you, Professor O'Connor. Thank you for tolerating us as well. I hope you enjoyed our random light show in the background there. What we had to switch computers from one to another, so it's a mess right now, so I apologize for that. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. Anyone have any questions here, please put your hand up.
Thanks. Sorry to say my name, or
Please.
If you like it.
yeah, Joanna Leidenhog. So I think panpsychism, quantum and Monism are very compatible theories explaining different things, but they fit together very nicely. So from that, I wasn't really clear what the difference was between your presentation between cosmopsychism and cosmic hylomorphism, and why I should prefer the second over the former.
Good. Yeah, I think you're right, but often cosmopsychism it comes out of panpsychism, and often on this view, they sharply separate consciousness and cognition. They say, and so often your panpsychist will, at least in the kind of tradition I'm familiar with, they'll say cognition, thought, that can be explained wholly in physical terms. It's just in terms of functional entities that interact in certain kinds of ways. In principle, that can be wholly physically realized, doesn't matter. There's just this felt, subjective, qualitative residue that's left over that you can't capture, right, in terms of physical science. And that's what we're going to, and then we have to say something about that, and then you motivate panpsychism. And the problem is, it divorces this felt qualities from cognition, and say they really are completely independent of each other. But then the problem is, I want to say that if you want to be a theistic monist, you want to say there's some kind of cognition at the cosmic scale, right, of God, some kind of thought, it's just left out of the picture. But it doesn't have to be. You could say there's a closer linkage. I think hylomorphism is just a way, a framework that makes that more explicit. It says, look, there's a unity of the whole that is not just about conscious experience, but is in terms of how it functions. The activity. Activity is unified. That's the element. So yeah, it's not a deep. Maybe it's a way of making explicit that the cosmopsychist should embrace that. Thank you. Yeah, I think you had your hand up.
I did, yeah. Mike Ashfield, thank you for your talk. This question it's sort of a question of clarification, and I feel like maybe, I think you were clear on this. I think I'm just a little jet lagged, so I was wondering if you could help me with something. How would you characterize the distinction, if there is one, between like us as individuals and God on this view? Is there one? What would be your preferred way of describing the relationship between particulars like us and the one thing?
Yeah. So on this view that I'm just describing, I'm not necessarily endorsing.
Yeah.
We're derivative entities in the sense of in the order of explanation for how reality is structured. The whole comes first. That's kind of primary, and we can think of that as God. It's this cosmic mind, and you could potentially ascribe other attributes to it. But we exist, but we're kind of limited aspects. We're dependent, inherently dependent, right? We're embedded in the whole. You can't really understand us independently of the whole. Our function derives from the whole. So our nature, how we act, is in some sense borrowed from or directed by the activity of the whole. But we exist. There's a reality. We just are not fundamental entities. So it would be the analog of on an atomistic picture. This chair. Chair exists, right? But its derivative, its elements on the atomistic picture come first. They are fundamental, and the chair is just a structured arrangement of those. Its powers are conferred on it by its atoms and the relationship of the atoms in the philosophical sense, whatever, subatomic parts. But it's just that it's that similar, only it's in relation to the whole, not to my elements.
So then, just to
Please.
clear, yeah. So then, does that mean? I mean, I guess I don't know what someone would say on that sort of view. Like, is the chair ontologically distinct from its atoms? I suppose somebody would say no, and that's what you want to say about us as well. We're not ontologically distinct, we're just derivative little sort of.
Right, we're not ontologically distinct in the sense of our being is not separate from the being of the whole, right? But we're not identical, right? Because we're a limited portion of the whole, and we have a certain kind of unity, right? We're not an arbitrary, like, just collection of things. We're a unified, a limited aspect of the whole. But we're not ontologically distinct, meaning our being is just a portion of the being of the whole. Yeah. Whereas, what I was calling classical monotheism in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, God exists is an independent substance from the world that he creates, right? Even though the world is deeply dependent on God, moment to moment, in this way of thinking, it's a distinct being or substance. And the monist denies that, right? The monist says, no, okay. And I think it was you that had your hand up, yes.
Hi, my name's Manima.
Okay.
I was just wondering, I might have missed it. I'm also jet lagged. Could you explain how the cosmic hylomorphism view answers the intentionality objection you raised for cosmos psychism? The intentionality piece that, what would we be aware of? Because that seems to require an outside object.
Okay,
would
good.
it just be awareness? Would it be awareness of something?
So I think, so if you're this kind of thinking of a divine mind, the mind of the whole, this unified thing that is God, that is the totality of all things, what is it thinking about? There's nothing independent of it. It exhausts, right? There's no being independent of it. So it's inwardly or self-directed sort of thought, I would think it would have to be, right? And you say, how does that work with, in terms of scientific theorizing? In the portion that I had to quickly rush through, the suggestion would be something like, well, physics describes the world as unfolding over time, all right, in terms of physical laws governing, and then somehow these transitions, these one state of the universe giving rise to the next, that could be the physical description of what, from the perspective of the whole qua God, is unfolding self-thought.
Okay.
That was going to be the suggestion.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, it's hard,
Yeah.
but I'm just kind of gesturing at a view, but I think you're right, there is a real question here. How does the cognition go, and what is it directed at? But that was going to be my first suggestion.
If we can do two more questions, we have one from Benedict here, and we also have one from Ricardo, who's been waiting as well. If we have a little time,
Okay.
we should.
Okay, thank you, sorry, I hadn't noticed you back there, yeah.
Hi, Benedict Röcke. Just a brief question. So I was thinking about the omnisubjectivity
Yeah,
and also whether on your conception there is like one whole stream of consciousness of which our consciousnesses are part. Would you say so? And does that entail, if so, that for every state of mentality I am in, God also experiences what I experience in the same way? So how many subjects of experience are there in one mental state? Is it me and God always, or is it only God ultimately?
good, yes. So I think there's a plurality, I'm trying to, that's the non-illusory, right? If you have a sort of view that says, we really do exist, we are entities, but we are radically dependent entities, and God is not a wholly independent substance. Okay, that's difficult to see how to put all those pieces together, but the commitment is we are subjects, but God is a subject. God is the ultimate subject. So our conscious experience is an aspect, a very tiny fragmentary aspect of the divine consciousness. So if I experience pain, say, is God in pain? Well, my pain is this from God's perspective, is this tiny conscious bit embedded in the larger whole. And I want to say, yeah, that's an aspect of but it's not experienced by the whole God on this understanding as painful, right? Because it's like there's this fabric of conscious experience that is cosmic in scale, and that's just one little. It's like a color palette, right? It's like one little bit of paint within this vast arrangement of qualitative felt qualities. And so what to us might be a very bad, intrinsically bad, or that doesn't necessarily carry over. Okay, that's the quick answer. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the talk. My question is about the whole
Yes.
and the parts. Because when you talk about panpsychism and cosmopsychism, usually people stick to a constitutive approach,
Right.
but we also talked about emergence. And if you have a theistic monism, it seems to me that it would be desirable that we human beings still have free will, right? In some sense, it might be linked to a theistic view. So it might someone who defends a constitutive approach might have a hard time trying to defend the fact that we do have free will. So that's my question. How you see the ontological dependence between the whole and the parts?
Yes. I mean, this is difficult. This is because some of the figures that I think are expressing, again, Ramanuja, I think, right, who wants to have a place for human free will, is a good example of this. But it's one thing to say that, oh yeah, we have free will. It's another to kind of give a theoretical account, how is that possible, given the other commitments of the view. I don't have a worked out picture, but it would be almost the inverse of emergentism, right? So the emergentist, strong emergentist about human nature says, yeah, we're composed of parts, but at some point when you get the right kind of organized structure, new qualities, fundamental qualities, just and powers, right, appear or are associated with organized wholes, right? But that's a bottom-up emergentist perspective, right? So can you have some of the mirror image of that going top down? You have the whole, it's prior to everything, but somehow that whole naturally parts out into chunks that are natural unities, such as ourselves, and then maybe down at the elemental level. Maybe, but I don't see an alternative to constitute. I mean, we are. There is a kind of constitution here because it's monist, right? We don't want to say there's an independent substance because, yeah, I'm not sure what the alternative would be to some kind of constitutive. But by constitutive, I don't mean reductionistic. It's just, but it's constituted by. I mean, it's the stuff of me is an aspect of. I mean, I'm speaking very crudely here. The one unified substance that there is, right? Because there's nothing over and above the one substance. Well,
But can you still have free will in this picture?
well, one hopes so. I don't have a worked out view, but I agree. One would like to be able to have that. Yeah, but I think I'm out of time.
Is it fast?
Oh,
Your question?
It's been answered by these.
Okay.
by his
Ah.
Then we're good to go.
okay. All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you very much.
We can talk further. I'd like to hear what you think.